In the years since Security Breach came out, many people have tried to figure out the secrets of the Post-it note room, and for good reason. Covered floor to ceiling in used Post-it notes filled with nightmare-owned staffbot heads, and featuring a table with staffbots seemingly representing the Afton family, this room clearly means something. However, in spite of even recent attempts to solve this room, I don't think the true answer has been fully revealed. There's something that's been overlooked that changes not only everything we thought we knew about this room and who was inside it, but also has major ramifications for the story of Security Breach. But before I get into that, make sure to stab that subscribe button, which is now the wrong color, and ring the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any future theories. It seems generally agreed upon that the Post-it notes show a robot coming into consciousness, starting with messages written in binary before moving on to barely legible scribbles and then actually decently written words and phrases. But if this is the case, who is the one writing these notes? There are two main theories I've seen about who the occupant of the room could be. One that was suggested way back at the beginning of the year, and one that came into mainstream community consciousness while I was working on this video. While they both have their merits, there are some aspects of the room that don't match either suggested occupant. As reference for these theories, I'll refer directly to videos by The Game Theorists and FNAF, the channel, not the acronym, as they're the ones I've seen referenced the most and go through the evidence for each candidate pretty well. I recommend you check them out at some point, so I'll link them in the description, but I'll be going over a lot of the points they make here as well. First candidate, as presented by MatPat in the game theory video, is the crying child, the youngest Afton brother, who seems to be connected to Golden Freddy after he died when his older brother Michael and Mike's friends put him in the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic. The fact that each of the staff bots at the table represent a member of the Afton family highly implies that the room's occupant is someone connected to or a part of the family itself, especially when backed up by a post-it note that looks like someone who doesn't know how to write, well, wrote, "You are Afton family." On top of that, there's a Fredbear's Family Diner poster in the center of the table, potentially connecting back to the crying child's death, and another sticky note that says "All for me," harkening back to the survival logbook where a faded message says, "The party was for you," and a spirit that's likely the crying child responds through altered text, "It was for me." With the vengeful spirit sticking around after Pizzeria Simulator to torment William in Ultimate Custom Night, before getting seemingly trapped in Princess Quest based on the former name of the file of the princess being Cassidy and the "It's Me" code in the game, the other Golden Freddy spirit could have stuck around as well. However, there's one problem with the crying child, or some version of him being the one occupying the room. A couple actually, but one major one, and it's that the room is named after a completely different character. The texture file for the door to the Post-it note room is literally labeled Charlie Door, and this isn't a case of the texture being pulled from somewhere and happening to have the same name. No, this texture was found in other places to have a different, much more generic name, meaning Steelwool deliberately changed the file name, most likely to reference Charlie Emily, the spirit in the puppet and daughter of Henry Emily, William Afton's former business partner. Fortunately for me, my months of procrastination due to school paid off, and FNAF made a video explaining the main details, so I don't have to go as in-depth as I originally planned. But if Charlie is the room's occupant, there's a lot that starts to make sense. With Charlie being connected to the puppet and the many similarities the puppet has to Nightmare-Own, that could explain the presence of the Nightmare-Own staffbot heads. It could also explain why there's a Post-it note drawing of a security guard, since while the crying child would have probably seen security guards previous to the bite, he wouldn't really have a reason to draw one when the altered text in the logbook states "I can't see," meaning that while possessing Golden Freddy, the crying child wouldn't have been able to see any of the security guards. However, Charlie, having possessed the puppet and attacked security guards herself, would have a much greater reason to draw one. Additionally, in the blob, while most of the eyes on the animatronics are lit, showing the presence of remnant/agony, there are two masks that don't have their eyes lit up, Circus Baby and the puppet. And since Circus Baby's spirit Elizabeth seems to be heavily connected to Vanessa, a video on which I'll link in the description, to me it stands to reason that Charlie would still be around as well, especially if she was a facilitator of Ultimate Custom Night as suggested by her dialogue about being aware while the other animatronics in Ultimate Custom Night were like animals. However, there are some things about Charlie that don't make sense with what we see in the room. Don't get me wrong, I definitely think she's there, but some things aren't easily attributable to Charlie, such as the Afton family staff bots and "You are Afton family" and "All for me" post-it notes. In his theory video, FNAF suggests that Charlie was brainwashed or controlled into believing she's William Afton's daughter, in a similar vein to Elizabeth from the Fourth Closet possessing the adult Charlie robot, but the evidence for that just doesn't line up for me. For example, one thing he pointed to as evidence was a conversation had between a mom and dad staff bot about the dad quitting his job at the expense of his children and a down payment on a new closet, leading to the mom taking the kids. FNAF says the conversation was meant to be between the mom and dad Afton staff bots, and was likely a reference to the closets the Charlie bots were in during the novel trilogy. But the thing is, evidence in the game doesn't really line up with this. In the game files, the conversation between the two staff bots is located directly after all the dialogue for the pizza making minigame, which wouldn't necessarily prove anything on its own, but when playing the pizza minigame, it used to be possible to access an area where you find a small closet with two wet floor bots and a staff bot standing beside it, a parent and two children. As a result, I find it more likely this was a conversation meant to happen as a sort of Easter egg if you access this area that ended up on the cutting room floor rather than any sort of lore about the Afton family and closets. He also suggests that the door to the sister location room is meant to represent one of the closets as well, but I find it more likely that if it is meant to be a closet, it's probably another connection to Elizabeth. After all, the room is from Sister Location, the game where we meet meet Elizabeth, and since Elizabeth was the one behind the fourth closet in the book, The Fourth Closet, my guess is that the door that leads to the room from Elizabeth's game is meant to represent Elizabeth, if anything, even if it's small. Not saying it's impossible, of course, but even if Charlie does have some connection to the room, I don't think that's enough to explain the connections the Post-it note room has to the crying child or the Afton family in general. But then there's the issue that Charlie's name is literally written on the door itself. It doesn't make sense. At least, not if the room only had one person in it. Now hear me out. While examining the texture files for the Post-it notes, I noticed that the messages are mostly grouped by type. There's one page where pretty much everything is hard to make out, one where things are shaky and mostly drawn, and one that's a mix of shaky and clearly written. But on the first page of textures, where everything else is scribbles and binary, there's one message that's just as legible as the messages on the third page of textures. This is my home, leave. While I don't necessarily think the Post-it notes are purely in chronological order, the fact that this texture was put in the first slot on the first page, especially when textures that more closely match the others could have been put there if they just needed to fill space, strikes me as significant. I don't think this is a general blanket statement telling people to keep out or anything. Whoever wrote that note wrote it because someone else was in the room with them. With that realization, I went through all the Post-it notes again, and the pieces started to click into place. The strange switches between the first and second person, the messages that seem arbitrarily written, and the fact that there's strong evidence for both Charlie and the crying child being in the room all make sense if it isn't just Charlie or just the crying child, but both of them. Notes that say hello and goodbye, you and me, and you are Afton family rather than I am Afton family. It's not one robot kid reminding themselves of their past, it's two. It's even pretty clear who's writing each note. Based on the novel trilogy, Charlie was born in 1980, went missing in late 82, and was declared dead in 83, meaning she was a toddler when she was killed. I don't know about you, but my experience with toddlers shows that they aren't exactly great at writing clearly and tend to draw pretty shakily, not even necessarily knowing how to write in English yet, possibly explaining the binary messages. Meanwhile, we don't know what age the crying child was when he died, but it seems pretty clear that he wasn't a tiny child given he was able to walk to and from the restaurant in his house. So I'd say he's at least a few years older than Charlie, and as such would have clearer handwriting and neater drawings. And wouldn't you know it, all the notes that give evidence for Charlie being the speaker are written shakily, and the ones that give evidence for the crying child are written clearly. Even the way the Post-it notes are written hammers this home. Other than the Post-it note that says leave, all the notes that are written clearly are in crayon, as though the crying child was the original occupant of the room, and after the whole "this is my home, leave" didn't work out, he ended up sharing his writing utensils, leaving him with the crayon and Charlie with whatever the other notes are written in, so that they could communicate without speaking, since there's a pretty high likelihood that with the Pizzaplex in use, someone would go near that room at some point and could have discovered them. So if we've got Charlie and the crying child both talking through the notes, what exactly is the reasoning for them to draw and set up pieces of their pasts? Well, in the FNAF books, it's very strongly established that the dead tend to forget. William flat out says as much in The Silver Eyes, and in The Fourth Closet, the kids he killed have to be reminded that William is the one who killed them. I think Charlie and the crying child are in a similar situation, with them having hazy memories of who they are and how they got there. And the Post-it note room is them putting their memories back together, so to speak. The recreation of the Afton family is the crying child remembering his family. Meanwhile, the Nightmare on staff bot heads, with how similar they look to the puppet mask, is likely Charlie remembering her ties to the animatronic. Speaking of which, Charlie seems to remember a decent amount, at least from her time as an animatronic. She draws 7 smiling faces, possibly representing her, the missing children, and the crying child, or maybe Elizabeth, though I don't know why she'd necessarily get included since I don't think Charlie knew her that well. This texture is directly located under one that says all my friends, might I add, and while I don't know if that's meant to be indicative of anything, I definitely find that placement to be interesting. There's also the drawing of the security guard, which she would have experience with from her time as the puppet, and a note that says grown-ups only, possibly referring to how, according to the Silver Eyes, the spirits of the children only attack grown-ups out of fear that they'll take away their happiest day, but will actively protect other kids, which also probably explains why they attacked Phone Guy and Jeremy Fitzgerald in FNAF 1 and 2, even though they don't look like William. The crying child has less written, so it's hard to say for sure what he remembers, but something I find interesting is that Charlie is the one who writes the "You are Afton family" Post-it note, implying that one thing he didn't remember was who his family was, at least to some degree, possibly explaining the reason why Charlie would not only draw a security guard, but also what looks to be Circus Baby, or Scrap Baby. My thought is that Charlie was helping him remember his family, and drew what she last remembered seeing them as from her time as the puppet, Mike as the security guard, and Elizabeth as Scrap Baby, since that's how Charlie would have seen her from inside Lefty. Even this little squiggle on the Post-it note looks like it could be Scrap Baby's lobster claw hand. Though it could be that the crying child did remember that he had family, but not the Afton part, given he does draw a girl that could represent Elizabeth, so maybe Charlie is just giving him references for what they looked like as far as she's aware for the family table. Either way, he does seem to have some memories of his death, with the "all for me" Post-it note, as well as the drawings of presents and balloons, and the close-up of Fredbear, which, as MatPat mentions in his video would be the last thing he saw before getting bitten. So if Charlie and the crying child are both in the room and they're trying to get their memory sorted out, what does that mean for Security Breach as a whole? Why else make this massive room if it isn't going to be relevant to the story after all? There are a couple ways I could see things working, but what I think is likely to be the case is highly dependent on Gregory and how he fits into the picture. One of the more well-known theories is that Gregory is the crying child in some way, shape, or form, which means he would be the one with Charlie in that room. But is it even possible for Gregory to be the crying child? Well, if you've been keeping up with the lore, you probably already know about the Pigpen cipher that's written on the wall of the sister location room and already know what it says. However, one thing you might not know is that all the punctuation that's usually shown with it, totally arbitrary. There's no punctuation in the actual wall code, and as such, I will be using the no punctuation version for this theory. For those who don't know, the code reads as follows. Break and mend, I built the breath they hunt now drawn to life, not real, still keen and frit and fraught with thought and zest and jest, no blunt woes, dodge, duck, flash, shoot, crawl, run, crush the vile band, cry not, try not, do not hold out hope, know your life, your aim will save those with soul. With dodge, duck, flash, shoot, crawl, run, crush the vile band being literally what Gregory does in the game, I see no reason why the rest of the message wouldn't be about Gregory as well. And wow, does it have implications. The break and mend bit is its own can of worms that I'll probably save for a dedicated breakdown video, so make sure to subscribe for that. But what stands out to me is that after that, it says, I built the breath. And then, they hunt now drawn to life, not real. There are other ways you can arrange this message with punctuation and phrasing, but honestly, most of the ways that make sense get across a very similar message. Whoever wrote this message built the breath and says they are hunting life that is not real. What else would this be but Gregory being hunted by the Glamrock animatronics? And if that's the case, that means Gregory is the life that's not real, the breath that was built. Gregory, like it or not, is probably a robot. But even if he is a robot, does that mean he's the crying child specifically? Not necessarily. After all, in the ending where Gregory escapes the Pizzaplex alone, one of the silhouettes in the news article about the missing people looks pretty much exactly like Gregory. But if Gregory's a missing kid, how could he be a robot? Or the crying child? Well, back in February, I made a theory video on who Patient 46 is, and while I recommend you watch that video since it goes into a lot more depth, what's important here is that I came to the conclusion that the people who are going missing are being replaced either physically or mentally to carry out Fazbear Entertainment's dirty work through Glitch Trap's control, explaining Patient 46's strange discrepancies between their life story and their actual past, and why Gregory is sleeping in a box when someone clearly cared enough to report him missing in the first place. He's probably not the original Gregory that actually went missing. But does this mean Gregory isn't the crying child because he's actually a missing kid? Again, not necessarily. Even if Gregory was built as a duplicate of a missing kid, it's possible that the reason he isn't another murder-happy Patient 46 or infected by Glitch Trap, as far as we can tell, is because there is a spirit in there that, like Vanessa, was able to lock the virus away in his mind. That soul might be the original Gregory, or it could be an issue of programming, but that discounts the evidence that does point to Gregory being the crying child, at least in some way. There's some pretty solid evidence other than the obvious visual similarities too. For one, no one in the Afton family stays dead for more than 2 minutes at a time, and with how Vanessa seems very connected to Elizabeth and Michael is a strong candidate for who's possessing Freddy, why should the crying child be the only exception? Especially in the context of the 3-star ending of Security Breach where Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head sit atop a hill, all wearing or shaded in the color purple, which is largely associated with the Aftons, with Vanessa eating ice cream and Gregory having taken a bite out of a yellow Freddy popsicle, relating back to how Elizabeth and the crying child both died. Plus, with the post-it room being a thing, the crying child pretty much has to be somewhere, so why not the character in the game who has the strongest connections to him? But there are, of course, a few issues with this. Gregory doesn't seem scared of Freddy and has pretty much no issue vibing in Freddy's stomach hatch, even though he's technically a version of the animatronic that supposedly killed him. And without Gregory isn't, well, crying, that's a pretty big difference between him and the crying child we see in FNAF 4. His personality just doesn't line up. But here's the thing. None of that matters. Whatever personality the crying child had can be overridden by virtue of the fact that he's a robot. And based on the wall code in the sister location room, I think that's exactly what happened. After listing all the things Gregory does in Security Breach, the code says, cry not, try not, do not hold out hope, know your life, your aim will save those with soul. These, and even the whole list of other things Gregory does, are phrased like instructions and goals. But if Gregory wouldn't even be reading this until he somehow managed to find it, but did all those things anyway, there would have to be some other way for him to know this in order to make it his goal. And if the author of this code built the breath that is Gregory, who's to say they couldn't have programmed in those instructions themselves? After all, even possessed animatronics are largely bound by their code. The animatronics in the Follow Me minigames couldn't go into the safe room because the room wasn't programmed in on their maps. Charlie was lured into Lefty due to it emitting a bracelet code the puppet was programmed to respond to. Circus Baby is a bit more murderous than your average child, and Glamrock Freddy acts in line with his personality chip even though he demonstrates pretty clear signs of possession, which I go over quite thoroughly in a previous video I'll link in the description. Since it seems pretty likely that Gregory is a robot, who's to say he hasn't received a similar treatment? One of the things directly listed in the code is cry not, and who better to give that instruction to than the character who is known specifically for crying? The reason Gregory acts the way he does is because he's been programmed to, and that's overriding his original personality. So honestly, yeah, unless the outfit choice was completely arbitrary and the Afton sibling parallels mean absolutely nothing, I think Gregory is meant to be the crying child. But if he is, how did he get from the post-it note room to the point he's at in Security Breach? After all, Gregory seems to know literally nothing about how security at the Pizzaplex works, saying he doesn't know who Vanessa, the only supposedly human security, is, and needing Freddy to explain the way the security in the building works. Not to mention he has 0 security clearance and needs to collect badges to get anywhere. On the other hand though, every arcade cabinet in the building has player GGY winning by almost an inhuman amount, you could say. And I'd be very surprised if GGY wasn't a shortened form of Gregory. If that's the case, Gregory has probably been at the Pizzaplex for a while, unless it was the kid he replaced who got those scores, in which case I want to know what kind of kid has the time and skill to beat high scores by tens of thousands of points on every single arcade cabinet in the Pizzaplex. With how deliberate that detail is and the fact that it's the subject of a future Tales from the Pizzaplex book, I'd be very surprised if it wasn't significant in some way. So if Gregory has been at the Pizzaplex long enough to get those scores, that would probably mean he's had plenty of time to write sticky notes with Charlie as well, but it wouldn't explain the lack of memories. Maybe it could be passed off as the dead tend to forget, but then again, who's to say something didn't happen that caused him to forget? When we meet Gregory at the beginning of Security Breach, he's hiding in Freddy because Vanessa is trying to get him. This implies pretty strongly that he escaped specifically from Vanessa. Since Charlie and Gregory don't seem to have been staying only in the post-it room, what with Gregory out getting his high scores on all the arcade cabinets and the little hideaways that Charlie seems to have in other areas, Gregory probably wasn't careful enough on one of his outings and got caught. And when he did, well, Vanessa is working with Glitchtrap, and with Gregory being a robot, it's completely possible that she was either trying to infect him with the virus or break down any barrier he'd put up to quarantine the virus in his mind, which could have messed with his memories. Even if not, to me this somewhat explains why Gregory has no security clearance, since he might have gotten any passes he did have confiscated. Alternatively, it could be that Vanessa or someone else caused the commands in Gregory's code to activate, and in the process, that messed up his memory. Clearly, he still remembers some things, like that people are going missing, and he doesn't really react to the post-it room when he goes there, possibly implying he doesn't find it out of the ordinary, but it's possible that in order for him to accomplish the tasks lined out for him by the code, him remembering certain things would cause him to take different actions, and as such, those memories were purged. After all, if he remembered how to get around the building and didn't have the commands to crush the vile band, which is only now drawn to life, not real, might I add, chances are he probably would have just continued doing what he was doing and hiding out, or he would have hid until 6 AM without bothering to dismantle the glam rocks for parts and just left. It's completely possible that there's some other explanation for it, and if you have any ideas, please feel free to share them in the comments, but this is what seems likely to me from what I've seen. Whatever the case may be, there's substantial evidence that Gregory has been living at the Pizzaplex, and I don't think him being unfamiliar with the building as of Security Breach is enough to discount that. So if that's been what's happening with Gregory, or even if it isn't honestly, what does Charlie have to do with Security Breach? She's the one with her name directly stated on the door after all, so her being there is definitely significant. With the sticky note room being uninhabited by the time we see it in Security Breach, I find it likely that Charlie is hiding somewhere else in the Pizzaplex. And given we don't see her, she might be in an area of the Pizzaplex that we can't access in Security Breach. Charlie wouldn't have gotten her security clearance taken after all, so she might have access to areas that need level 10 security badges. And if that's the case, we might get to see her in the DLC in one of those areas. Who knows, maybe the girl we'll be playing as in Ruin is Charlie. It's not like the robot body she's in would have to perfectly match her hair color in the books. And it would explain why there's some random little girl in the Pizzaplex even though it's in such broken condition, and why Gregory might come to her for help, or why she would be willing to help him. Of course, there is FNAF's theory that Charlie is patient 46, and while I do somewhat see the merits in that, I think if Charlie is 46, she probably isn't currently under Glitchtrap's control, at least not fully. Otherwise, I don't think the post-it note room would have so much evidence for her and the crying child interacting. She may have had the virus, but like Vanessa, locked Glitchtrap away. Though, on the other hand, it's possible that she is partially under Glitchtrap's influence, but wasn't fully aware of it. Maybe the reason Gregory got caught is because Glitchtrap was in her head gaining Gregory's trust, only to turn him over to Vanessa. The reason she doesn't show up to help in Security Breach would be due to either guilt or Glitchtrap keeping her out of the way. To be honest, I'm not really sure. It's possible there's evidence I'm overlooking, but with most of our information on Charlie being limited to the post-it room and associated areas, it's hard to come to anything conclusive other than that she's there. If you think any of the ideas I presented have any merit, I would really appreciate it if you shared this video, since my long-form content doesn't usually reach very many people. Or if you have any ideas for why Gregory doesn't seem to remember things, an alternate explanation for his parallels to the crying child, or theories about Charlie and whether or not she's corrupted by Glitchtrap or otherwise involved, I do read every comment, so please feel free to share your ideas. Don't get stabbed, and have a nice day.